Passover / Passover Presentation for the 23rd of April 2016. Shabbat Shalom, brethren, and a belated happy biblical New Year to you all. Sunset this evening marks the start of the Passover day, so that is our study for today. Some of you may have studied it or in part before, but I know others have not, so let us familiarize ourselves with its relevance. I shall also send out a previous presentation done in 2012, which may have some additional information for your listening. The Hebrew name for the day is Pesach, P-E-S-A-C-H, commonly spelled, and means to protect or protective sacrifice for the event. The English word Passover is taken from what actually happened. God passed over the houses of the Israelites who had painted the blood of the lamb on their doorposts and the lintels. The Passover is first mentioned in Exodus 12 verse 11, which reads, "And thus," this is God speaking, "and thus shall ye eat it with your loins girded, your shoes on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and ye shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover," or Yahweh's Passover. So notice this is God talking to Moses, or talking to the people through Moses, and he calls it his Passover, not the Jews. Leviticus 23 verse 5 also mentions it. It reads, "In the 14th day of the first month at evening is Yahweh's Passover." So it fits into the history of God's people when they first became a nation, and as a nation were delivered out of the bondage of slavery in Egypt. So let us backtrack a little bit and remind ourselves how they got to this point. Remember, Yahweh God made all things and humans. He made one race, the human race, and he is the father of us all. He shows no preference except by a criteria of obedience, as Peter said in Acts. I can't remember what it was, so many people said in Acts. When God made our world, he furnished it with all life-sustaining things his human children needed. Physical as food, and spiritual as a time with him to learn his and our purpose, so that we can coexist as a father and children. Our existence is part of his cycle of universal events, the cycle of the day, month, and year, the cycle of seasons, of vegetation growth and rebirth, women's menstrual cycles, and even our annual celebrations and memorials, which we call holidays. But where did this remembrance of annual days originate? It was God-given in Genesis chapter 1 verse 14. It reads from verse 13, "And the evening and the morning were the third day." And verse 14, "And God said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs, and for seasons, and for days, and for years." Verse 15, "And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and it was so. And God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night." Obviously he's talking about the sun and the moon. "He made also the stars. And God set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And the evening and the morning were the fourth day." So there was an evening and a morning before God made the sun and the moon, because we read in verse 13, identify time. So why would we need to identify time? Rather than just sleep when we got tired, awake when we wished, pick fruits or vegetation to eat when we got hungry, etc., etc. Basically, we could have lived a life of self. Remember, Adam and Eve had not yet sinned, so Adam, did not have to till the ground for food, nor did they need clothing. The sun and the moon, indicators of time, were so that we knew when to keep God's holy days. Weekly as a Sabbath, the seventh day, and annually. Both are called Sabbaths. You will not find a calendar in the Bible except for the first to sixth day, and the Sabbath, the period of a weekly time between the sixth and the seventh sunset. That's the only day that was given a name. So it is ludicrous to think that one can change the name to a period of time between two other markers, as, say, midnight the sixth day to the seventh, to get what people call my Sabbath and your Sabbath, or any other period than that of God's. Between the sixth sunset and the seventh sunset is the only period he gave that name to. Likewise for the months, he named the first month Abib or Aviv, according to your pronunciation, then second, third, etc. Jewish month names of today are Babylonian adoptions, i.e. Nisan, for the first month. In the King James Version, going back to Genesis 1:14, it reads, "Let there be light in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night." The day and night were already divided. We read this in Genesis chapters 1 verses 4 to 5. Genesis verse 4 says, "And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day." God and the angels do not need the sun and moon to know day from night. Those are for our solar system and our planets. Verse 14 continues, "And let them be for signs and for seasons." I'll come back to that word in a minute. "And for days and for years." A sign to whom? To us humans. For what? To recognize the seasons, the days and the years. For what seasons? Do we need the sun and the moon to tell us when it is hot in summer or cold in winter? When flowers will blossom in spring and die in autumn? Or can we recognize these things from seeing the plants and feeling the heat or the cold? We must also remember there was no seasons as we use the word today: spring, summer, autumn, winter, and so on. Genesis 2 verse 6, "But they went up a mist from the earth and watered the whole face of the ground. There was no rain nor snow season." Remember, Noah's generation thought him a fool to talk about rain and building an ark to float on a flood. The word season really means appointed time. It is the Hebrew word with a numerical number, H for Hebrew, 4150, pronounced moed. Strong's Concordance defines it as an appointment, that is, a fixed time or season, specifically a festival, conventionally a year, by implication an assembly, etc. It is used 240 times in the King James Bible, of which 147 is for tabernacle of the congregation. Now, I won't bore you with the breakdown. You can read it in the written version. But the point is, this word moed is not used for seasons mostly. It's mostly used for tabernacle of the congregation. So in short, a time before set by God for humans to have a festival and congregation before Him. In Exodus chapters 23, verses 15, it is translated as in the time appointed. In Leviticus 23, verse 2, the feast. In Numbers 9, verse 2, appointed season. The same word, Hebrew word, moed, translated as different things. In the time appointed, the feast, appointed season. In relation to the angels, or God visiting Abraham and Sarah and notifying them of Isaac's birth, we get a context of the word. Genesis 18:14. Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, at the moed, I will return unto thee according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Then we read in Genesis 21:1, and Yahweh visited Sarah as he had said, and Yahweh did unto Sarah as he had spoken. For Sarah conceived and bare Abraham a son in his old age at the set time of which God had spoken to him. So the first point I wish you to remember is annual times of meetings as a congregation was from the beginning of time, set by God who created the world and us. However, Passover was not one of these preset times. It came about as a result of God's promise to Abraham. In Genesis 15:13, it reads, And he said unto Abraham, Know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterwards shall they come out with great substance. So that promise and fulfillment shows God for who He is, able to foretell, control, and deliver world events according to His appointed times before they come about. It was no coincidence Jacob had 12 sons from 4 women. That one of those sons, Joseph, was sold into slavery by his brothers and ended up in Egypt, which led to the whole household of Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel, ending up there and 430 years later being delivered out of it. Nor was it a coincidence that change began on the first day of the year. God had made a previous new start with Noah on the first day of a year. Genesis 8:13. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from off the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark, and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And God repeated this practice a third time, Exodus chapters 40:17. And it came to pass in the first month, in the second year, on the first day of the month, that the tabernacle was raised up. The tabernacle where they were going to now congregate for their worship to God. So you see, it is a very significant experience in God's people's history. It marked the last of 10 plagues God brought on the anti-God system of Egypt and their gods, as told between Exodus chapters 7 and 11. An experience He wants remembered and memorialized forever. Exodus 12:14. And this day shall be unto you for a memorial, and you shall keep it a feast to Yahweh throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. By so doing, we partake of being part of His people. Recognize Him for who He is, as mentioned above, and His ability to deliver us out of any bondage or slavery. Passover is a memorial of redemption out of Egypt. And today, that Yahshua, the Messiah, has died to redeem us. Back then, in Egypt, no one was forced to paint the blood of the lamb on his doorpost in Egypt, and no one is forced to accept the Messiah's blood today. It's a matter of personal choice. Those firstborn who believed and chose wisely in Egypt, Egyptians or Hebrew, they lived. Those who did not, they died. Those who accept the protective power of Yahshua's blood today will live forever spiritually. Those who reject the precious offer and fail to keep his commandments will be destroyed, and physically and spiritually. So we'll be destroyed both physically and spiritually. So these are not my rules, but Yahweh's. The Passover is one feast that has already been both physically and spiritually fulfilled. So it is not something we look forward to, but rather we look back in commemoration of the event. Passover is a day of remembrance. It is a finished work that we can access. If you are not familiar with the event, you can read a whole account in Exodus chapters 12. I'll pick two verses for you to note, which is verse 26 and 27. And it shall come to pass, when your children shall say unto you, What mean ye by this service? That ye say, It is the sacrifice of Yahweh's Passover, who passed over the house of the children of Israel in Egypt, when he smote the Egyptians and delivered our houses. End of quotation. As we know, he gave them a way of life to live through his commandments, and also a land in which to live by these commandments. By so doing, we can live in service to him and not slavery of the world. There's only one God of the Torah, Bible to some people, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel, not Abraham, Isaac and Christian. Exodus 12:43. And Yahweh said unto Moses and Aaron, This is the ordinance of the Passover. There shall no stranger eat thereof. So if you want to be under the umbrella of that God, join his system of holding this day as a memorial to his event. The first event he did for his first and only born nation. Just like a loving relationship, when one remembers the first time they met their spouse, the first time he or she did something special for you. I once heard a marriage advisor say that when you fall out of love with a partner, remember the first time you met, etc., etc., and rekindle the love. I.e., when they passed over everyone else and chose you. That is how important remembering this first salvation by God to his people is. The only prohibition of the stranger eating Passover is explained in Exodus chapters 12:48. And when a stranger shall sojourn with thee, and will keep the Passover to Yahweh, let all his males be circumcised, and let him come near and keep it. And he shall be as one that is born in the land, for no uncircumcised person shall eat thereof. But that does not mean the uncircumcised cannot memorialize it on their calendar. Every Israelite born or grafted in is to keep the Passover without excuse. Either in the first month or the second. Numbers 9:6. And there were they came. And there were certain men who were defiled by the dead body of a man, that they could not keep the Passover on that day. They came before Moses and before Aaron on that day. Speak unto the children of Israel. And they basically asked Moses to ask God what they're to do. Verse 10, this is God's answer. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, if any man of you or of your posterity shall be unclean by reason of a dead body, or be in a journey afar off, yet he shall keep the Passover unto Yahweh. But the man that is clean and is not in a journey, and forbeareth to keep the Passover, i.e. doesn't keep it, even the same soul shall be cut off from among his people, because he brought not the offering of the Yahweh in his appointed season. That man shall bear his sin. Verse 14, and if a stranger shall sojourn among you, and will keep the Passover unto the Lord, according to the ordinance of the Passover, according to the manner thereof, so shall he do. Ye shall have one ordinance, both for the stranger and for him that was born in the land. So the point I'm reasoning this out is one law for Jew and Gentile as regards keeping the Passover. Deuteronomy 16:1. Observe the month of Abib, and keep the Passover unto Yahweh thy God. For in the month of Abib, the Lord, or Yahweh thy God, brought thee forth out of Egypt by night. As I said, the Babylonian name Nisan replaced Abib when the Jews were in captivity. The word Passover, specifically the 14th day of the first month, which is the day of Passover. However, it is also used to represent the 8th-day Passover holiday, which consists of the Passover day itself and the following 7 days of unleavened bread. So in other words, the word Passover is sometimes used for the whole 8-day holidays or just the specific day itself. We can tell it is really it's just one event, but made up of 1 day and a 7-day period. When your partner, so going back to my analogy about the couple relationships, when your partner not only passed over every other person and chose you, but also put every other thought for another out of their mind and committed themselves to you. So just like Passover is the day that God passed over the Israelites, and then we come on to this days of unleavened bread, when they were supposed to put all leaven out of their houses. The same way I'm saying that your partner hopefully has put any thought of anyone else out of their minds and have committed themselves to you. So similarly, we are to put the leaven of sin, the work of the devil, the other person, out of our lives and commit to God. The Passover day is not a Sabbath day of rest, but the first and last days of unleavened bread are. Yes? So the Passover is not a day you don't have to work, and so forth. But the first day and the last day of the 7th days of unleavened bread, you're not supposed to do any work. Not just paid work, employed work, work in your home, gardening and DIY. No, none of that such work. The days are supposed to be for your time with God. On those 2 days, no work is supposed to be done. As you may know, and hopefully you have already done, no product containing leaven or any sort is to be found in your home or eaten for those 7 days. It may seem an irrelevant thing, but if God requests it, you can be sure it is relevant. Now, whereas the Hebrew name for what we call Passover is Pesach, the Hebrew name for the feast, what we call the Feast of Unleavened Bread, is Matzah. You probably have seen the Jewish type flat biscuits, like cream crackers, if you know those Jacob's cream crackers, that they eat That is called Matzah. That feast is also mentioned in Exodus chapters 12, but I'm going to use another reference from Leviticus chapters 23 verse 6. It reads, "On the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto Yahweh. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread. In the first day ye shall have an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein. In the 7th day," this is verse 8, "is an holy convocation. Ye shall do no servile work therein." Exodus chapter 13 verse 5. "And it shall be, when Yahweh shall bring thee into the land, which he sweareth unto thy fathers to give thee, thou shalt keep this service in this month." Exodus 13:6. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and the 7th day shall be a feast to Yahweh. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy quarters. And thou shalt show thy son in that day, saying, This is done because of that which Yahweh did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto thee upon thy hand, and for memorial between thine eyes, that Yahweh's law may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand have Yahweh brought thee out of Egypt. Thou shalt therefore keep this ordinance in his season from year to year." So we see how God didn't want this feast forgotten. You tie it on your hand, you put it on your forehead. Unleavened bread speaks of sanctification. Yeshua's body was without sin and not decay in the grave. God's people are set apart so that the leaven of sin would neither corrupt them. Pesach, Passover, and Matzah, unleavened bread, are called spring feasts because they occur in the spring season. The Feast of Unleavened Bread is all about sin and the resultant decay. Leaving yeast, anything that causes fermentation, must be absent from every Israelite home and from any food they would eat. Fermentation is a process of decay. The fermentation that causes bread to rise and grapes to break down into alcohol is a means of facilitating decay. Leaven is that agent that is added to food that brings on an accelerated rate of decay. The fermentation and the Bible makes a direct parallel between leavening and sin. Sin is an agent in man and in the world that results in death and decay. The more leavening that is added, the faster and more violent the fermentation process. The more sin that is in us, the faster and more violent is our decay, physically and spiritually. So the Feast of Unleavened Bread, Matzah, was, as was Passover, a remembrance of Israel leaving Egypt. Israel had to hurry to leave, so they had no time to prepare bread in a regular and preferred way by giving it time to rise and then baking it. Therefore they made bread without leaven, without yeast, the traditional Benjamin way. And they ate that unleavened bread for the first several days after their departure from the land of Goshen in Egypt. The leaven, the sin, was left behind. No decay, no sin was to accompany Israel into the new life and the new land they had been given, or about to be given the land part. One may say a land of a peculiar people and a peculiar ways, Yahweh's, was about to be set up. The Torah uses an interesting word to describe what Yahweh actually did when he saved Israel from Egypt and then took them away from their bondage. Redemption. They were redeemed. Redeemed means a price had to be paid for their freedom, and indeed it was. Possibly thousands of Egyptians and maybe some unbeliever Israelites who did not obey, as well as thousands of innocent livestock, died in order that Israel was redeemed. Notice the order of things. First, Israel had to accept the atoning blood of the Pesach lamb, and then the sin, the leaven, was removed from their lives. Now they were redeemed. It is the same for us. All of this was an act of mercy or grace by God Almighty because of a promise to a faithful Abraham. Paul speaks of the connection between the congregation in the wilderness with Moses and the New Testament congregation of the Messiah. In Acts chapter 7 verse 38 it says, "This is he that was in the church in the wilderness with the angel which spoke to him in the Mount Sinai, and with our fathers who received the lively oracles to give unto us." And 1 Corinthians 10 verse 1, "Moreover, brethren, I would not that ye should be ignorant, how that all our fathers were under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did all eat the same spiritual meat, and did all drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ." So in relation to Passover, Paul, he makes a similar connection. Hebrews 11:24, "By faith, Moses, when he was come 2 years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them." So the Bible is correct when it says in Ephesians 4:5, "One Lord, one faith, one baptism." The same Christ, Lord, was present with the Old Testament church, which is really called the word for congregation. He baptized them, they had faith in him, and they kept the Passover. We too are called to forgo being called sons of the world, or Pharaoh's daughter, to suffer any affliction imposed as a child of God, and enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season, to esteem the reproach of Yahshua more than the material treasures of the world, etc., etc. 1 Corinthians chapter 5 verse 7, "Purge out therefore the old leaven, that ye may be a new lump, as ye are unleavened, for even Christ, our Passover, is sacrificed for us." You may not physically see the invisible God as the riches and pleasures of the world can be seen, but I assure you, Satan offers sinful pleasures and riches, but he always hides the price tag. So Paul says that all he had attained was done. He had found something more precious than anything that Satan can offer. Yahshua died and went to the grave, but because he was the ultimate unleavened bread, he had no sin in him. That's why his body did not decay. Remember, decay is a result of leavening. Yahshua is the bread of life, we are told. Actually, he is the matzah of life. He is the unleavened highest, never decaying bread of life. John 6:15. This is the bread which cometh down from heaven, that a man may eat thereof and not die. I am the living bread which came down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, he shall live forever. And the bread that I will give is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. Remember John in Revelation 10:9, who ate the book, and then there's another prophet who I can't remember who also, ate a scroll, and it tasted bitter, but then it became sweet. So it is when we eat the Messiah's and his Father's commandments. Bitter to change our lives and priorities, but sweet once we accept with a genuine heart. He went to the crucifying tree, some say the stake, some say the cross, and died. That is the Passover. Then he went into that tomb, did not decay, and he entered in new life. That is the unleavened bread. Just as Yahshua died on Passover day, he entered the tomb during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The event that occurred in Egypt, the hurried cooking of unleavened bread, and the rush to leave are historic. They happened and are well documented. These things happen on a physical level. On a spiritual level, Yahshua was placed in that tomb and his sinless body refused to decay, and then he arose. The spiritual level, when Yahshua was placed into that tomb and his sinless body refused to decay, so I meant the Feast of Unleavened Bread was fulfilled on that occasion. We, in union with him, after we have accepted his Passover blood, have the sin, the leaven, removed from our lives as we enter a new life. Our bodies will decay because they are born of leaven, of sin, but our spirits will not decay because the leaven, the sin, has been removed from that aspect of our being. Rather, our renewed spirits will go on to a new and eternal life with our Creator on our resurrection. The Feast of Matzah is a remembrance of Exodus chapter 13. You can read more on this in the New Testament connection of the Messiah's death and our lives in Romans 6. Two verses which I use is Romans chapter 6:2 and 6:15. 6:2. God forbid, how shall we that are dead to sin live any longer therein? 15. What then? Shall we sin because we are not under the law, but under grace? God forbid. So we are to die to sin, not do it anymore. Like any commandment or instruction of God, the deceiver tries to distort it and mislead seekers. He does a good job of it either through our laziness, lust, selfishness, or because, as it says in Mark 30:22, for false Christs and false prophets shall arise, and shall show signs and wonders to seduce, if were possible, even the elect. One such deception is renaming the Passover, the Last Supper, and changing the appointed time to Easter, memorial of goddess Ishtar. He, the deceiver, also camouflages it with a scripture, in this case Mark 15:42. And now when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, and Mark 16:1. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome had brought sweet spices, that they might come and anoint him. And in Matthew 28:1, in the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn, towards the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. So here we have three verses with the word Sabbath. Hopefully most of you here now know from previous studies that we've done, the word Sabbath is used for both the weekly, seventh day holy day, and annual ones. So the Sabbath before the Messiah's death was not the weekly one we call Friday sunset, but an annual one of unleavened bread. We must remember, Yahshua gave us the method of calculation in Matthew 12:39. But he answered and said unto them, this is when the Pharisees leaders came and asked him for a sign as to his authority and who he was. But he answered and said unto them, and even an adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas, or Jonas we know him. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. Matthew 27:46. And about the 9th hour, Yahshua cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. That is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And verse 27:50, Jesus cried and said again with a loud voice and yielded up the ghost. So that was to show you this happened at the 9th hour. Lastly, the first day of the week starts at the end of the 7th. That ends at what we today call Sunset Saturday. Remember in Genesis, the evening and the morning makes up the day. Genesis 1:31. So putting all the scriptures together, we do not get 3 days and 3 nights from Friday sunset, the 9th hour, even to 6 a.m. Sunday morning after the Sabbath is past. John 11:9 says, Jesus answered, are they not 12 hours in the day? If any man walketh in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. So Yahshua said there were 12 hours in a day. Some erroneous teachers teach that if you take any part of daylight, maybe for a minute or an hour, you can call that a day. And that way, they say it is possible to get 3 days. A bit of daylight on Friday, after 3 p.m. before sunset came, then a whole day of Saturday, then a bit of daylight Sunday morning. But remember, Yahshua says there's 12 days, 12 hours in a day, not a little bit, not a couple of hours. Now that is assuming he rose on Sunday morning and not Saturday night, as I said. If he rose Saturday night, then you won't get that those Sunday morning daylight hours to add on into equation. But clearly this violates, I say, the 12 hours principle. There are 12 hours in a day, Yahshua said. Even so, even if they want to use that to get the 3 days, they will never get 3 nights. They'll get Friday night and Saturday night, but they'll never get the 3 nights. So this concept, or this theory, violates the only sign Yahshua said we give to them. 3 days and 3 nights, as Jonah or Jonas was in the belly of the whale in one place. He wasn't moving around, he's in one place for the whole 3 days and 3 nights. Sunday morning is when Mary and others went in the first daylight to the tomb, what we call Sunday morning. But he could have risen up to 12 hours earlier, after sunset the evening. Because Scripture says he rose on the first day of the week. It doesn't give an hour, yes? And it didn't even say, yes, he rose first. It says they went to the tomb the first day of the week and didn't find him there. So let's count backwards from when Mary Magdalene went and saw he wasn't there. Come back 3 days and 3 nights, and we should get his death on Wednesday, 9th hour. He got the ghost. He was a Passover lamb and had other similarities to the animal Passover lamb that he did in Exodus. Exodus chapters 12:46, for example. In one house shall it be eaten, thou shalt not carry forth any of it abroad out of the house. And this is the point. Neither shall ye break a bone of it. This is the actual animal lamb. And similarly, we have in John 19:32, it reads, Then came the soldiers and broke the legs of the first and of the second, that's the thieves, which were crucified with him. But when they came to Yahshua,